Taxation is theft. It presumes that the government has a higher claim on our property than we do.
Hi, I'm Nick Gillespie with Reason TV, and today we're very happy to be talking with Judge Andrew Napolitano, the host of the great Fox business show Freedom Watch, as well as the author of the new book, It is Dangerous to Be Right When Your Government is Wrong. Judge Andrew Napolitano, thanks for talking to us.
Pleasure to be here, Nick. It's nice to have the opposite role of what you and I normally have. This time you're the inquisitor.
I am not sure which is more terrifying for me, but I can go with here. A short history of some of the books that you've been turning out over the past few years include Constitutional Chaos. Then you have titles like To a Nation of Sheep, or rather A Nation of Sheep, to Dred Scott's Revenge, to your current book, It is Dangerous to Be Right When Your Government is Wrong.
Don't forget the Constitution in Exile.
Oh, no, I know that,
as
well as Dred Scott's Revenge. But I mean, I sense in the arc of your titles more militancy. Do you feel that we're on a downward path irrevocably towards a loss of freedom and liberty?
I think we're on a downward path. I don't think it's irrevocable. And I have to give full credit for the title of this book to Voltaire, who actually suggested it to me one day. Of course, it's 250 years old, and a famous phrase from him, it is dangerous to be right when the government is wrong. Look, in one respect, women have full rights, and African Americans have full rights. It shouldn't be something we are happy about, but when you consider the historic treatment of African Americans and women, it's about time they have those rights. And as much as I love Jefferson, they didn't have them in that era. In that respect, we are a broader, more expansive, freer society. But with respect to the level of regulation by the government, the areas of human behavior utterly and totally dominated by the federal government, much less a state government, the surveillance state, the welfare state, the warfare state, the regulatory state, the administrative state, we are on a downward spiral, and we are losing liberty with every tick of the clock. And unless we get a game changer in the White House and the Congress, or on the courts, this spiral will continue.
One of your chapters has to do with the right to own property.
Yes.
If we go back to the Kelo decision, which was, what, 2005?
Right.
That was horrible, the Kelo decision, which basically the Supreme Court said, yeah, a state jurisdiction or a state political body can take whatever they want from a private property owner, immediately to turn it over to another private property owner, as eminent domain abuse, defined. But that also sparked a counter force against eminent domain abuse. So, are we fighting the good fight, or in these cases?
We are fighting the good fight. In fact, just 3 days ago, the good people of the state of Mississippi amended the state's constitution to prohibit any state government in Mississippi from doing what the Supreme Court authorized in Kelo. And of course, the Kelo case only got to the Supreme Court because the state of Connecticut did not have such a prohibition. But as much as I love the Fifth Amendment, which requires that if the government wants life, liberty, or property, it has to engage in due process, which prohibits torture and compelled testimony against oneself. It is the linchpin of big government. Here's why. Jefferson argued, and I believe, that the only moral, valid, lawful exchange of property is one that is truly voluntary. Hamilton wanted at the Constitutional Convention the same powers that the king did, which is the power to take any property, and the king would decide whether or not he owed you anything. They compromised with the Fifth Amendment, which is the government can take what it wants, but it's got to pay you a fair value for it, and the government has to use it for a public use. Jefferson warned that the public use would be whatever the government wanted its friends to have, and that's where we are. And it's because Jefferson's warnings were disregarded that the government can now take anything. So I ask in the book, do we really own anything? Can the government take that infamous leather jacket that you're now wearing? Answer, yes, it can. If it pays you the fair market value.
Yeah, I was going to say it's really not worth very much. So,
because it's yours, no. It's worth a fortune.
I was going to say it's even more. It's like a car, Judge. As soon as I walk out of the store with it, 50% off the value. Well, you also talk, and I mean, you have a long list basically of all of the, all of our basic rights. The right to speech. There's no question that with, in any number of ways, the government at all levels is constantly trying to restrain and curtail our speech, political expression, things like that. By the same token, technologically, it's clear that we're able to express ourselves more freely and more effectively than ever. We saw this with, things like McCain-Feingold, in the attempt to use campaign finance laws in order to stop political speech. Forget about what the Supreme Court said in Citizens United. I mean, the fact is that people are now able to express themselves more freely. Do you buy that, and is that enough?
No, I don't buy it.
Okay.
Two FBI agents walk into a library in Bridgeport, Connecticut, and one of them has a self-written search warrant under his arm. I know this sounds like a joke. Two guys walk into a bar, one has a duck under his arm, but it's true. And they serve a self-written, a search warrant, which under the Patriot Act, they wrote for themselves and authorized themselves to the head librarian saying, we want to know what books so-and-so is taking out. And by the way, you can't tell anybody that we were here. The librarian is 86 years old. The FBI agents are in their early 30s. She says, who the hell are you? She hands the search warrant to her 75-year-old assistant. Fast forward 2 years later, they're in court because they talked about it. The latest trend in free speech violations is compelled speech. There's a sub rosa trend amongst prosecutors now to prosecute people for failing to report crimes that they have witnessed. And I will tell you, under the law, you have no obligation to report anything that you see except treason. There have only been 7 treason prosecutions in 230 years. The same First Amendment, which prohibits the Congress from infringing free speech, prohibits it from compelling speech. So prosecuting someone for not speaking, and then prosecuting someone for speaking truthfully, I got a search warrant from the FBI, what should I do about it, are egregious violations of the First Amendment.
You were talking about we need to get people in the courts, in the White House, and Congress. I mean, is this something that is going to be solved, or these infringements and incursions on our rights? Is that really going to be solved by politics, or because isn't politics the problem?
Politics is the problem, Nick. It's a good question. When George W. Bush was elected in 2000, but put aside the manner of his election, I wrote about that and I was critical of the court. And the Republicans took over the Congress. Like a lot of libertarians, I rejoiced because I thought after these years of Bill Clinton, we'll finally get small government. Instead, we got a government that was less faithful to the Constitution than any government since Abraham Lincoln's years, because there's just a Republican version of big government. So when I say a game changer in the White House or the Congress or the courts, I'm talking about somebody like Ron Paul, someone who is utterly, totally, and without exception, faithful to the values of the primacy of the individual. The government must stay within the confines of the Constitution. So for Ron Paul to return us to that government would require half the Congress agreeing with him and half the Supreme Court agreeing with him. Do I expect that to happen miraculously in the next 13 months? I don't, but it could.
And I mean, you must take, I think a lot of people who believe in limited government and libertarian ideals, I mean, when you look at the popularity of Ron Paul, who those of us in the movement have been following him for decades, but right. I mean, over the past 5 years, he's emerged as one of the great national leaders of the debate, in politics.
I like to think that Ron Paul is Barry Goldwater, and somewhere out there in the next generation is Ronald Reagan. There wasn't a Reagan Revolution.
Yeah,
it didn't happen the way we
So you want
thought
somebody
it would
to
happen.
come after Ron Paul and completely subvert everything that he actually stood for?
No, I want somebody to come after Ron Paul and perfect it.
Yeah.
We thought Reagan would perfect it. We now know he didn't, for a variety of reasons we could talk about in another forum. But Ron has succeeded in moving into the mainstream debates over issues and institutions which are very serious, like the Federal Reserve.
Right.
20 years ago,
yeah.
The establishment didn't want to talk about the Federal Reserve. Now, even Democrats are saying, you know what, we need to know what's going on there.
Right.
And all because of Ron.
And also the Pentagon. I mean, he has really,
yes.
I mean, not since, basically not since Eisenhower warned about a military-industrial complex do we have a guy who's actually, putting that on the agenda.
Correct.
Let's talk about some of the dicier issues, or ones that separate libertarians among themselves. In your book, you talk about the right to own your own body, but then you're also very pro-life. You're anti-abortion.
I am.
So where does the right to own your own body stop, and where does the right to the infant or the fetus or the potential human life begin?
I believe, and it is a question of science and it is a question of faith, that a fertilized egg is a human being. It is the byproduct of copulation by two human beings. I'm not talking about some scientist in a Petri dish now. And it has a full human genome, and I accept that as a definition. Stated differently, it has all the chemical and biological makeup necessary to become human, to become a person as we understand it.
Now that's
a postnatal person with nourishment.
Fertilized egg that has been implanted in the uterine wall. Not just simply a fertilized egg.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. If we can't draw the line there is no intellectually acceptable place to draw the line other than the convenience of the mother. So when I say you have the right to own your own body, the fetus is not your body. People say it's easy for you to say that because you're not a woman. I am obviously not a woman. But I say it because of my fidelity to some basic libertarian virtues. The primacy of the individual. The individual is greater than the state. The state cannot, without the greatest violation of a moral law, authorize one human being to take the life of another.
Do you support the prosecution of doctors and nurses and medical personnel who perform abortions?
The answer is yes. However, we have not seen that because of the bizarre frequency with which abortion occurs.
What about women who have abortions performed, and let's say the men who drive them there as well? Should they be prosecuted?
Anyone who kills an innocent life, whether it's George W. Bush or somebody in a back alley, should be prosecuted for killing the innocent life. Now, I'm not suggesting George W. Bush in this context with respect to abortions. I'm talking about other killings for other goals that he stated.
Where does this rank? I mean, because this seems like it should be at the very pinnacle of your...
It should, but it's not.
Yeah, so just explain a little bit about that.
If the government were in the streets randomly killing people, there would be riots in the streets to stop it. But because we have sterilized this murder, authorized it, legislated it, blessed it, if you will, lowercase b and blessed, there are no riots in the streets because the victims cannot speak for themselves, because they are totally dependent upon the perpetrator of the crime, because it happens in a sterile environment. There is not an outcry, as there should be.
Within the kind of broad base, I mean, you have thousands of